I'm 45 now, but when I look back on my life, I often feel like I'm still that confused 10-year-old boy, tugging at his shoes, waiting for his mother's approval before going outside to play with the other kids. It's hard to explain how it feels to be constantly watched, constantly checked on, constantly told how to live your life. But for years, that's all I knew. My mother controlled everything. When I was young, I remember being told what to wear, even how to wear it. I never picked out my own clothes, not really. My mother chose my wardrobe based on what she thought would make me look proper, or worse, based on what she thought would make her look good. If I ever dared to voice an opinion on a shirt or a pair of shoes, she'd snap back, "You don't know what's best for you. Trust me, I know what's best." And I did. I trusted her because it was the only option I had. It never occurred to me that I might have a choice. When I got older, the rules just kept piling on. If I wanted to go out with my friends, I had to give her a detailed itinerary, who I was going with, where we'd be, and when I'd be back. If I didn't check in by the hour, she would call me, often multiple times. If I didn't answer, I would get a lecture on how I had disrespected her by not picking up the phone. This was her world, and in it, I was just a player, following her script. It wasn't just the small things either. My choices, my life, everything I did was carefully scrutinized. When I started dating, I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd have the chance to live my own life, to be the man I thought I could be, separate from her control. But she didn't give me that freedom. The moment I started bringing women around, my mother would carefully assess them, sizing them up with that all-knowing look that I had grown so used to over the years. "She's not your match," my mother said when I introduced her to one girlfriend. The girl was kind and smart, but my mother had decided, without a single word from me, that she wasn't right for me. I didn't argue. I never argued. I just kept quiet, let her voice drown out mine. It didn't matter that I was in my 30s. It didn't matter that I was capable of making my own decisions. With each passing year, I felt more like a child, with my mother standing over me, guiding my choices as if I couldn't see the world for myself. And then, when I met Sarah, the woman I would eventually marry, things started to get worse. I thought maybe this time would be different. I thought maybe I could carve out a space for myself, where I could be the person I wanted to be. But when Sarah and I decided to get married, my mother made it clear she wouldn't let me go without a fight. On the day of the wedding, she took me aside, and as we stood together in the empty room, she whispered into my ear, "I'm the one who's always been there for you, not her. She won't understand you like I do." I felt the weight of her words, but it wasn't until the reception that the real sting came. We were sitting at the head table, my new wife glowing beside me, and my mother sat there, poised and calm. Then in front of everyone, she leaned into Sarah as though they were sharing some kind of secret. Her voice, low but clear, carried across the table. "He's weak. He would have been lost without me." The words hit Sarah hard. I could see the color drain from her face. Her smile faltered for just a moment, but she recovered quickly, as if she could ignore the subtle poison my mother had just planted. I could feel the tension building between us, but I didn't say anything. I didn't shout or demand an explanation. I didn't raise my voice because, in that moment, I knew something. I knew I was trapped. Trapped in a web my mother had spun, where I was nothing without her, where I was weak, unworthy of a life outside of her shadow. And I didn't know how to break free, so I did nothing. I sat there, pretending to enjoy my wedding day, all the while feeling the sting of my mother's words, watching her work her quiet, calculated magic. The reception went on as if nothing had happened. People laughed, danced, and toasted, but inside I felt like a stranger in my own life. The person I was supposed to be, the man I thought I could be, was nowhere to be found. There was only the boy, the one who would always be nothing without his mother. I remember thinking, how did I let it get this far? The day ended with the usual smiles and pleasantries, but my mind was racing. Something inside me shifted, just a little, but I couldn't place it. I felt small, diminished, and I felt a strange urge to escape, but not yet, not yet. The months that followed my wedding felt like a slow unraveling. The weight of my mother's words lingered, a constant hum in the back of my mind. Sarah and I tried to build our life together, but there was a quiet tension that had settled between us, one that neither of us could fully articulate. My mother's presence, even when she wasn't physically there, cast a shadow over everything we did. She would call, sometimes 3 or 4 times a day, checking in, asking where I was, what I was doing, as though I were still that boy who needed constant supervision. It wasn't just the phone calls. It was her voice in my head, the nagging reminder that I wasn't capable of making my own choices. She'd always been there to smooth the way for me, to make decisions, to tell me what I should want and need. But the truth was, Sarah and I had started to drift apart. Not because we didn't love each other, but because of the weight of my past, my mother's relentless influence. I was torn between the woman I had married and the woman who had never let me go. One evening, after another long day of Sarah and I barely speaking, I looked at her and saw the exhaustion in her eyes. She had been so patient with me, with the mess of my life and my family, but I could see she was struggling. "You're not happy," she said, her voice soft, almost like she was afraid to admit it herself. "I am," I lied, though I knew she saw through me. "I'm just tired." But I wasn't tired. I was trapped. And deep down, I knew Sarah was too. I hadn't realized it yet, but I was beginning to suffocate her with the weight of my unresolved issues. The phone calls, the constant checking in, the subtle manipulations. They were all creeping into our relationship. My mother had started to infiltrate every corner of my life, and I was too afraid to stop her. The moment of separation didn't come with a bang or an argument. It wasn't some dramatic scene. It was a quiet evening, one where the silence between Sarah and I felt like it had stretched to a breaking point. I was sitting on the couch flipping through some old papers for work when Sarah walked into the room. "We need to talk," she said. Her voice was low, but there was something firm about it. The way she said it wasn't a request. It was a statement. I looked up at her, already knowing what was coming. "What's wrong?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. She sat down across from me, and for a moment there was just the soft hum of the lights above. Then she spoke, her words piercing the stillness. "I can't live like this anymore. I can't live with your mother's shadow hanging over everything we do. We need space. We need to be able to build something that's just ours without her in the middle." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I should have felt relief, a sense of clarity, but instead there was just a sinking feeling in my chest. It felt like she was giving up on me, and I couldn't decide if I felt betrayed or if, deep down, I understood why she had to. I had been suffocating both of us. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I didn't beg her to stay. I simply stood up, walked to the bedroom, and started packing my things. The quiet that filled the apartment in those moments was deafening, but it was the only sound I could hear. I packed my suitcase methodically, almost robotically, as if going through the motions of something I had already resigned myself to. There was no drama, no yelling, no desperate pleas, just the soft rustle of clothes being folded, the gentle click of a suitcase being zipped up. When I finished, I stood in the doorway of the bedroom for a long time, looking at Sarah. Her eyes were red, her face pale, but she didn't say anything. She didn't need to. We both knew what had to happen next. "I'll go," I said quietly, not sure if I was speaking to her or to myself. "But I'll fix this. I'll get things right." She didn't reply, and I knew she didn't believe me. And in that moment, I wasn't sure I believed it either. I left that night. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stay. I didn't have a plan, but that was nothing new. For so long, my life had been dictated by other people's plans. My mother had always been the one to chart my course, and I had never stopped to ask where I wanted to go. I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment. The space felt empty, cold, but it was mine. The first few nights were the hardest. I lay awake on the couch, staring at the ceiling, thinking of Sarah, thinking of my mother, thinking of the life I had just walked away from. I was alone, and for the first time, I felt it deeply. But there was something else stirring inside me, a small flicker of freedom, a tiny spark of possibility that I had never allowed myself to feel before. In the silence of the apartment, I started to hear a new voice, my own. It was quiet at first, unsure, but it was there, and I couldn't ignore it. I knew I had to start over. The first few months were rough. I didn't have the comfort of my mother's constant check-ins, but that didn't stop the ghosts of her influence from haunting me. Every time I made a decision, I could hear her voice in my head. You're making a mistake. You don't know what you're doing. You'll fail without me. But I didn't fail. Not right away, at least. I found work, small jobs at first. I picked up any freelance project I could find scraping by, but it was enough to keep me going. The hardest part wasn't the work, it was the silence. The nights alone, the feeling of something missing, the echo of a life I thought I wanted. Still, I pressed on. I focused on building something, anything that was mine. And eventually I found a space I could call my own, a tiny workshop, tucked away in a quiet part of town. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I worked long hours, pouring every ounce of my energy into making it a success. The first 6 months were difficult. There were days when I thought about giving up, about calling my mother for help. I could almost hear her voice on the other end of the line, reminding me that I would never make it on my own. But I resisted the temptation. I didn't call. I just worked. I didn't hear from her during that time. No phone calls, no visits. It was as if she had vanished from my life completely. And for the first time, I realized I didn't miss her. 6 months later, I opened my workshop. It was small, but it was mine. And it was the first thing I had ever built entirely on my own. The phone rang one evening, interrupting the rhythm of my work. I glanced at the caller ID, half expecting to see Sarah's name. I hadn't heard from her in months, but I wasn't surprised that she hadn't called. I wasn't sure I was ready for that conversation yet. But when I saw the name of my mother flash on the screen, I felt a knot twist in my stomach. I didn't pick up. I let the phone ring through to voicemail. The old habit of avoiding conflict, of not dealing with her pressure and demands, kicked in. I tried to push the feeling away, but it lingered. After a few minutes, I checked the voicemail, expecting it to be a brief message, a simple check-in. But it wasn't. Her voice sounded strained, more desperate than I'd ever heard it. "I need you," she said, her words trembling. "I've lost everything. The landlord's evicting me. No one is helping me. You're the only one left." The words hit me harder than I expected. I knew my mother was struggling, but hearing her admit it, hearing the vulnerability in her voice threw me. I took a long breath, feeling the weight of everything I'd walked away from, everything I'd tried to leave behind, pressing down on me. I didn't call her back right away. I needed time to think. My first instinct was to ignore her, to maintain the boundaries I had so carefully built around myself. But the guilt started to creep in. I had no choice but to confront it. She was my mother, after all, and despite everything, I couldn't completely sever that tie. I drove to her apartment the next morning, but as I stood in front of the building, I hesitated. I hadn't been here in over a year. I wasn't sure what I expected to find, but I wasn't ready for what I saw. Her door was cracked open, and through the gap I could see piles of boxes and bags, a messy chaos that didn't belong in a place that had once been neat and orderly. I knocked, but there was no answer. Hesitant, I pushed the door open, finding her sitting on the floor in the middle of the mess. She looked smaller somehow, as though the years of controlling my life had finally taken their toll on her. I stood there for a long moment before I spoke. "Mom?" She looked up at me, her face haggard, tired. There were no harsh words this time, no judgment, just a faint smile, a fragile recognition that she still needed me. "I knew you'd come," she said softly. "You're the only one who ever did." I didn't respond. I couldn't. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to say. All the years of resentment, of bitterness, seemed to vanish in that one moment. She wasn't the powerful figure in my life anymore. She was just a woman who had reached the end of something. "I can't stay here," she continued, her voice shaky. "I don't have anywhere else to go. I've lost everything." For the first time in my life, I looked at my mother and saw her not as the omnipotent force that had dictated every part of my existence, but as someone who had failed. Failed in a way I had never been allowed to. She had always told me I was weak, that I wouldn't survive without her. And now here she was, needing me. The guilt I had been fighting came crashing over me again. But this time, something was different. I wasn't the same person who had walked out of that house a year ago. I wasn't the scared son who felt trapped under her thumb. No, this time, I was different, stronger, more certain of what I needed. "Let's go," I said quietly. "I'll take you to a place where you can get some help." She stared at me for a long moment, her eyes searching mine as though looking for some sign of the boy she once knew. But all she found was the man I had become. I took her to a temporary accommodation center, a place that offered shelter and basic services for those in need. It wasn't glamorous, but it was clean and well-maintained. It was a place where people could get back on their feet, a place where my mother could have a fresh start without the crumbling support system she had once leaned on. We didn't speak much during the drive. I could feel the tension between us, the weight of years of unresolved issues hanging heavy in the car. I wasn't angry anymore, at least not in the way I had been. There was no rage in my heart, no desire to make her feel small or insignificant. Instead, there was just this quiet understanding that we were both standing on the edge of something new, something uncertain. When we arrived, I walked her inside and made sure she had everything she needed. I handed her a small envelope with money, enough to get her through the next few weeks. I gave her the contact information for a social worker who could help her navigate the system, someone who could guide her through the process of rebuilding her life. But I didn't stay. I turned to leave, and before I walked out the door, I paused. I looked back at her. She was standing there clutching her bag, her eyes welling up with tears. But I didn't comfort her. I didn't reach out. I wasn't that person anymore. "Mom," I said quietly, my voice calm, devoid of any bitterness or emotion. "You were right. It's better without you." And with that, I walked out of the building, leaving her standing there, alone for the first time in years. That evening, I didn't feel any sense of triumph or victory. I didn't feel the surge of justice I had expected. There was only silence, a quiet space I had created for myself. And in that silence, I finally began to understand what true freedom felt like. The next few weeks passed quietly. My wife, Sarah, and I settled into the rhythm of our lives. I focused on the workshop, keeping it small, but steadily growing. It was a space I'd built from the ground up, something that was entirely mine. It was a hard-earned peace, one that was earned through quiet persistence, through silence. Every so often, my phone would ring, and I'd see her name. Every time I'd ignore it. Every time the weight of my decision would sit heavier in my chest. But I never called her back. Not yet. I had made my choice and I wasn't going to go back on it. There was something in me now, a hardened sense of self-respect, a certainty that wasn't there before. I had learned the painful, liberating truth. My mother didn't define me. She never had. But that didn't make it any easier. Then one afternoon, when I was knee-deep in a project at the workshop, I received an unexpected call. It was from Sarah. "John," she said, her voice shaky, "your mother, she's here." My heart skipped. The tone in her voice made my pulse quicken. "What do you mean? Where is she?" "She's at the door," Sarah said. "She says she's been trying to reach you for weeks." I paused, a mix of confusion and frustration surging through me. "I told her." "I know," Sarah interrupted, "but she looks desperate, John. She says she has nowhere else to go." I stood there, frozen for a moment, as if my body was betraying me, forcing me to face what I had been avoiding. I felt a shift in the air, a cold draft of something old and familiar. For a second, I considered ignoring it, letting Sarah deal with her on her own. After all, I had made my peace. But then something in me shifted again. Maybe it was the faint remnants of the son I used to be. Maybe it was just the weight of knowing what I had come from, what I had tried to escape. "I'll be right there," I said quietly, my voice calm but strained. When I arrived home, I found her standing at the doorstep, her thin frame hunched beneath the weight of an old suitcase. Her eyes looked tired, worn, as if the years had finally caught up with her. She hadn't changed much in appearance, but I could see it now, the desperation in her face, the vulnerability I had never allowed myself to see before. She didn't say anything at first. She just stood there waiting for me to speak. "Mom," I began, my voice quiet but firm. What are you doing here? She looked at me, her eyes darting toward the door behind me, then back to my face. I told you, she said, her voice breaking. I have nowhere else to go. I've lost everything. Please, John, just let me stay for a while. I don't want to be alone. It was the first time I had ever seen her like this. Not in control, not dictating my life, but simply a person who had failed. Her armor was gone, and I didn't feel any triumph in seeing her like this. I didn't feel any anger either. It was just a quiet acceptance that this moment had arrived, whether I wanted it or not. I didn't invite her in. Instead, I just stared at her for a long moment. You had every chance to change things, Mom, I said, my voice tinged with a coldness that surprised me. But you chose not to. And now I'm not the one you can rely on. She flinched as though my words had struck her, but I didn't let up. I made my choice when I walked away, and you made yours when you told me I was nothing without you. Her eyes softened, but there was no apology, no acknowledgement of the years of manipulation, the control, the way she had broken me down. All I saw in her was a person who had always expected to be saved by others, by me. I'm sorry, John, she whispered, but there was no conviction in it. It was just an empty phrase, one I had heard 1,000 times before. You're sorry? I asked, an edge of disbelief creeping into my voice. You're sorry now, when there's nothing left? I'm sorry, but that's not enough. It's never been enough. I took a deep breath, the anger rising again. But this time, it wasn't the same burning anger from the past. It was calm. It was measured. It was the anger of a man who had learned to control his emotions, to use them for clarity rather than destruction. I'm not going to help you, I said firmly. Not this time. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She stood there stunned, the reality of what I was saying finally sinking in. I wasn't the same person who had been at her mercy all those years. I wasn't her pawn anymore. You were right about one thing, I continued. You were right when you said I wouldn't survive without you. But what you never understood was that it wasn't you I needed. It was me. I needed myself, my own strength. And now I have it. With that, I turned away from her, closing the door softly behind me, leaving her standing on the doorstep. I didn't feel any satisfaction. I didn't feel any triumph or bitterness either. What I felt was the weight of freedom, the weight of knowing that I had finally become my own man. A man who could stand on his own, without the chains of the past pulling at him. I didn't look back. The silence in the house was more peaceful than I had imagined, more final. But somehow in that silence, I felt stronger than I ever had before. Days turned into weeks. Life continued in the quiet, simple way Sarah and I had built it. The workshop was growing, albeit slowly, but it was mine, and it was enough. We found ourselves laughing more often than we had in a long time, enjoying small, ordinary moments that felt like luxuries now that the past had been pushed out of our lives. I didn't think about my mother, not much anyway. The occasional thought would surface when I'd hear something that reminded me of her, but it was fleeting. I no longer had to carry the weight of her expectations or the burden of feeling like I owed her something. I had built something real, something lasting, and it wasn't tethered to anyone's approval or control. Then one morning, as Sarah and I sat down for breakfast, I noticed the small, familiar envelope sitting on the kitchen counter. It was addressed to me, written in the same cursive handwriting I had seen on so many letters throughout my life. My heart sank as I picked it up, recognizing the handwriting before even reading it. It was from her. I opened the envelope, unfolded the paper, and began to read the short, carefully written note inside. John, I never expected you to forgive me. I know I've done things that can never be undone, and I can never ask you to forget. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. I never knew how to love you the way you needed. I always thought my way was the best way, but I see now that I was wrong. I'll never ask for your help again, but I hope you find peace. I don't expect you to understand, but I'm trying to. In my own way, I'm trying. I sat there for a long time after reading it. My mind was quiet, but my chest was tight, as though something had been loosened but never fully released. I had been right. This wasn't a letter meant to seek forgiveness. It was an admission of defeat. My mother had, in her own way, accepted what had happened. Sarah sat across from me, watching me carefully. She knew this wasn't just any letter. "What does it say?" she asked, her voice soft. I handed her the letter without speaking, my eyes still fixed on the paper. She read it in silence, her fingers lightly tracing the words. "You don't have to do anything with it, John," she said after a moment, looking up at me. "It's in the past. It's a piece of your story, but you're not bound to it anymore." I nodded slowly. She was right. I wasn't bound to it, but that didn't mean the past didn't shape me. It just meant I was no longer a prisoner of it. That afternoon, we made the decision to visit the house we had been looking at for the past few months. It was small, but it was everything we needed. A cozy, quiet place to call our own. The kind of place I never thought I'd be able to afford on my own. But here I was, standing on the threshold of something that was entirely mine, and entirely ours. When we walked in, there was a feeling of rightness, like I had found the space where I was finally meant to be. The walls felt like a blank canvas, waiting for us to make it our own. As we moved through the house, Sarah's excitement was contagious. She ran her hand over the banister of the stairs, smiled at the little alcove by the window, imagining where we could put the couch, the plants, the photographs. We were already planning a life here, a real one, full of the small joys we hadn't allowed ourselves before. After we signed the papers, we sat in the empty living room for a while, just the two of us. Sarah rested her head on my shoulder. "It's perfect," she said, her voice filled with contentment. I thought about everything that had led to this moment, the years of pressure, of manipulation, of self-doubt, the hurtful words that my mother had thrown at me, the way she had tried to control every aspect of my life. And yet here I was, standing in a home that I had built with my own hands, a life that I had chosen for myself. I felt the weight of it, all of it, and I realized how far I had come. And then as I sat there, I thought about the letter she had written to me. I thought about the years of anger, of resentment, of silent rebellion, and how, in the end, it had led me to this place. Not because I had fought her, but because I had learned to stop fighting and simply walk away, to stop letting her words have power over me. I reached into the drawer of the desk where we kept all our important documents. The envelope with my mother's letter was still there, tucked into the back of a drawer. I pulled it out and stared at it for a moment. Then slowly I placed it into the shredder. I didn't feel angry as I watched it disappear. I didn't feel spiteful or victorious or sad. It was just done. It was the last piece of the past, the last chain that I needed to break. I had no more ties to that version of myself, no more ties to her. When it was over, I stood up and walked over to the window. I could see the neighborhood outside, quiet, peaceful, and full of possibilities. "I think this is the beginning of something good," I said, turning to Sarah, who smiled at me. "It already is," she replied. And for the first time in my life, I truly believed it.